Is it time? It is. Yeah, and we are live. Alright, welcome back to my game engine stream, where I make a game engine. So yesterday we got rotation hinting working pretty well. That was not very difficult with the new since I've refactored my engine. A lot of things are getting a lot easier and simpler to write. Let me open up the scene file. Essentially, we added a new element that's editor specific to scene files. So this is the Euler rotation hint. This is the where we store how many degrees rotation we have a specific sprite. So if I select sprite 1, which I think was this one, yeah, it was this one, and we go to rotate, whenever we rotate about an axis, you'll see that we're no longer clamped to the negative 180, positive 180, and so on. These values get stored into the scene file when we go to save it. So we not just have the quaternion, but we also have the Euler rotations that were last placed by whichever level editor or artist was working on the scene file, which is great. I was also doing a bit of a survey of the other popular game engines out there to see how they handle their transform components. I think I want to do something similar to Unity's, something similar to Unreal Engines, where you go to single click and you can edit the text, and then you click and drag and you can move it. As it is by default, when you use one of these fields in IMGUI, you have to double click to change, or you have to control click to change. I'm probably going to need to do a little bit of modification on IMGUI to make that nicer. And since the stream yesterday, I did take and play around with this a little bit, and I identified a problem that I just went ahead and fixed. It turned out that I was having issues with mouse pass-through and raw mouse input being gathered when the scene view was undocked. That required a little modification to Dear IMGUI, and I have made that modification and posted it. Now everything seems to be working just swimmingly. So first things first, I know that I'm going to want to address this today. The not a number business. I was in pursuit of just getting this thing working. I kind of glossed over the problem of indicating how which sprites have I got selected right now? Yeah, of indicating in the editor how indicating that an axis or a element was not aligned with a value from another part of your multi-selection. So in this case, these guys have identical transforms except for their position on the x-axis, and the way that I have it represented is not a number. I want that to be dashes if I can, and I want to utilize the text boxes to do that. I'm not actually entirely sure how I should manage that. There might be a way for me to directly set the text. But this is where I'm kind of having to do a little bit of exploratory work in Dear I Am GUI because I'm still quite new to it. Here we go. So let's take a look at what the drag float 3 does. I'm gonna close. Actually, you know what? I just had a glorious thought. I just had a great thought, actually. For the first problem that I mentioned, which is that I want to do single click for edit and then drag for transformation, it just occurred to me, if I used an input float 3 instead, where it's just text, then I could do, I could utilize my editor's input API to freeze the mouse over the window, just as I capture and freeze the mouse when I'm right-clicking in the viewport, and then use that to affect the value. But you know what, I'm gonna put that on the back burner because that's not as important. Okay, so let's take a look at how the drag float 3 works. So I've got it pulled up here. We'll go to its definition. Take a sip of coffee. So we've got this. Basically, the drag float 3 is just an extension of drag scalar n. We have an early return if I'm GUI window says that it's going to be skipped. That's an interesting thing to put. Interesting because in most cases when you're going to be rendering, you're going to be doing it inside of a window, and you usually will conditionalize that window upon whether that window tells you to draw. So I don't know, maybe this is handling cases that are beyond my use case. But we can ignore these first 3 lines, and we begin a group, which locks horizontal string position and capture group bounding box to the one item. Okay. We push a label. Push the label as the ID, so that way it's got the item has a unique identifier. We push multi-items widths, which calculate default item width given value passed to push item width or next item width. So this probably has to do with spacing out the first 3 components and then the label. Window DC. I guess this stands for the draw context. Window draw context. Item width stack pushback. DC item width. The thing that I'm interested in is at what point do we actually write the value? Because I might be able to, after the fact, go in and write a different value. The thing that's making this hard is that drag float 3 kind of depends on the text being floats. So we're rating the data from P data. It looks like this is all a fancy abstraction around drag scalar. So this is we just passing the P data to drag scalar. And I'm looking for other uses of P data, the pointer to the data. Okay, here we go. If temp input is active, only clamp control click input when IMGUI slider flags always clamp is set. Okay. Temp input scalar, drag behavior. Looks like there's a templated function that governs this, and this is a complicated piece of code. And I'm not seeing, digging around through this for a little while, and I'm not seeing where the data is actually converted to text. round scalar with format T. This might be it. Okay, here we go. So we've got the format string. Okay, now we've got IM format string. It looks like this is an output buffer, so we actually do some writing in here. Got a VXN printf, prints to the buffer, which is good. So this V string is the actual value that we write out. Okay, making progress. And then we pass that, or we assign it to constant car P, and then, well, dereferencing is equal to a space. Okay, so this is trimming white space, I guess. Okay, I'm confused. What do we do with it then? So, format string, it allocates 64 characters for up to 64 characters in your string. IM format string writes out to it. Excuse me. And then we declare a constant car P, and we apparently we increment the pointer until it's pointing to an actual character, not a space. And then, okay, I just was blind. Okay, V equals type I am A to F, so I'm guessing that's ASCII to float. So this whole thing was to convert it to a float, but we started with a float. Okay, here we go. Render text clipped. Okay, so my read of this is that it's actually not possible for me to like create a drag float 3 and then after the fact through like some IamGUI call go back and edit the text. The reason why is because it's directly rendered here. Technically this is being added to a render queue, but the point is that by the time this returns, the text that's going to display inside of the inside of each of the boxes has already been submitted to the render queue, and we can no longer edit the text. So we're going to need to use something besides a drag float 3, which is fun. That's great. We're going to need to break this down a little bit. So for starters, we're probably going to need to roll our own windows. By the time we get to this, to drawing the drag floats, we do already know whether there's going to be an alignment issue. In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and simplify that code right now. I'm just going to get rid of all the knotted number stuff because they're obfuscating how this normally works, or how this is supposed to work. Yeah, so basically when we if we have any selected items, we do the transform component display. We set pause floats, and we have this array of float values that we have to map the GLM vec3 to, because IamGUI accepts a pointer to an array of floats when you pass in to drag float 3. We can probably get rid of that as well once we get this going. But the gist is that we go through every single one of these, and if we find that one of the selected items has a different value for the rotation or for one of the axes on the scale or position components, we mark is scale whatever it is thing aligned false, and so we can use these booleans here to determine whether to do a drag float or whether to just do a text box that contains the dashes. Yeah, so I guess we'll start by copying and pasting the contents of this guy. Not sure if we'll need the IamGUI context here. And a lot of these are going to be scoped to IamGUI. Push multi-items widths. Apparently he's not a member. So it's part of the IamGUI namespace, but its declaration is probably in another header. It's one of the internal header items. Which I suppose we can include. I'm not seeing any warnings here indicating that we shouldn't have the helper, but let me first just see what's in the definition. Yeah, what I'll do is I'll include IMGUI internal into my code. Just so that I have access to those helper functions. And now multi-item width should be showing up. So we'll need to pass in the number of components, which is 3. We'll also need to know the full width. Apparently there was a helper function called calc item width. Calculate default item width given value passed to push item width or set next item width. Okay, so this isn't specifically intended to pass in a default to this. So we get a default item width. We say that we want 3 of these to fit in that space. Next item width is generally cleared, consumed by item add or whatever. Okay, what is it complaining about? Oh, it's just IntelliSense being slow. All right. And then we get G data type info. Data type. If we look at the original location, data type is a IMGUI data type being passed in. So that's probably a float or something like that. Not getting anything. This is interesting. So apparently this is a lookup table for the size of a particular type, and then the string name, and then default formatting things. That's interesting. I can get rid of that and pass in the actual data I want to pass in. Now we have a for loop for each of the number of components. We've got 3. We push an ID for each one so that each box is got a unique identifier. If I is greater than 0, then we do same line. Oh, whoops, I am editing the wrong location. So we will need the IMGUI context here. But I think we have a separate call for how we get it. I'm trying to remember what the function was. Huh, that's interesting. I could have sworn that there was a way for us to get it from the window. Hang on a second. Get current context. Yeah, it returns a pointer to... Right. Okay, and now we can access G, arrow, whatever. All right. So we'll hold off on that, getting the size of the type, because we just do size of float. Get IMGUI push ID. IMGUI same line. Let me prepend all of these with the IMGUI namespace. All right. So far, so gravy. Then we got the value changed. This is a Boolean, and we will we have an or equal, which means that it'll set the thing to true if it's not already true, if this value returns true. And so we do the drag scalar. Now I think this is where my code will differ from... Whoop, my enter key got stuck. I think this is where my code's going to differ from the example, because where I will use drag scalar in many cases, I won't use it if the position has been marked, or the position axis has been marked as unaligned. And in that case, instead of doing a drag scalar, I will do just a box with dashes in it. So I'll say to do add dashes if value is not aligned, like that. Cool. Value changed. Now we've got to pass in a few things to the drag scalar. We need to pass in a label. Actually, we're not going to pass in a label in this case because we're these are just going to be side-by-side boxes, and they've already got a unique ID pushed onto the ID stack. It's asking for the IMGUI data type. It's asking for the pointer to the data. All right. So IMGUI data type float. Pointer to the data would be, I guess it'd be pos floats at I. And then, right? Oh, that's I need to actually do the address of. Then we've got v speed, which is the speed at which we are doing the slider. In mine, I was doing 0.1 speed, but I'll probably tweak this going forward. Come on. Pmin and Pmax. For a drag widget, Pmin and Pmax are optional. Basically, they'll pass in a null pointer for those. Then we need a format string. Oh, maybe this is where I can do. Maybe this is where I can do my dashes instead of opting out of the drag scalar. What I could do is I could leave it as a drag scalar, but the text that we have for the format would just be dashes, and it wouldn't include a %f for the float. Okay, that might be something. And then IAM GUI slider flags. We'll have to consult the original code to see whether the flags had any special values associated with them. But for now, I'll do a null pointer on these. And then the format string, we'll need to do whatever the default was, which was, I think it was like %3f, like up to 3 digits. Where's my format string? Oh, I was passing in the format string. Okay. So we'll pass in that in here. If I was to use the format string as a way to pass in dashes instead of values, then that actually would probably simplify my rotation specifically. In that, the rotation section of the transform component is literally all or nothing. So I'm not going to be doing dashes for just a single component. I'm going to be doing dashes for the whole thing. So perhaps that would be viable. And then what flags did we pass in? I guess the flags were something that I didn't utilize. I wonder what flags there are. IAM GUI slider flags. So there's always clamp, invalid mask. I don't know what that is. Logarithmic, no input, no random format, read only vertical. Yeah, I don't think any of these apply. Cool. All right, and then we pop the ID for the unique member. Pop item width, which all of those widths were pushed onto a stack with push multi-items widths. And this is where we assign out the data that we had modified, if we modified it. So in this case, we'll do size of float for the size, and then we'll do the address of pos floats at I. P-data is undefined. Yeah, that would be here. Wait. Oh, I misunderstood this. So what this is doing is it's actually moving the pointer to the next. Okay, so pdata was one that I got rid of, and I apparently needed. Where are you, pdata? So pdata is normally passed in as a void pointer to drag scalar in. Okay, I don't actually need this line at all, because instead of using pdata, what I did was I had used the address of pos floats at I, so the incrementation will occur automatically on this. Whereas in the IMGUI code, they're using void pointers. So they have to increment manually by the size of whatever data type it is. Hey, Joel. When will your YouTube C++ course start? How long ago did you message that? Oh, no, it's on my screen right now. I glanced down at my phone and I thought that you had messaged and it just didn't pop up on my screen. But I just glanced down at exactly the right time. I don't know. So, I'm not. It's not something that I was planning on doing. Did you, the thing about like YouTube tutorial courses is that like there's so many places that have already done these topics to death, right? So I've thought about doing tutorials on a few very specific things, but it's only because those are things that there aren't already a million videos on. So simple things like how to get an ICO file without using a janky website or something like that, I might do a tutorial video on, but I don't think I've got the time or patience or expertise to do a full-on C++ tutorial video series. But anyway, yeah, welcome in. I think I've largely got this figured out. Find rendered text end for position, label. If label is not equal to label end, why would it be different? I'm kind of reverse engineering a little bit. Not in the sense that I'm like starting with closed source, but in the sense that I'm trying to re-implement their drag scaler so that I can do more custom things. Label is passed in through drag scaler n. Yeah, this is interesting. I wonder why they do this. So when you do IMGUI drag scaler n, you pass in the label for whatever the scaler is going to be, and then it asks down here at the very, very end whether label is not equal to label end. What's this function do? Maybe I'm misunderstanding it. Render helpers, kind of a legacy mess, it says. Text display end equals text. So first text display end equals the pointer to the string that we pass in. Then we say if text.end is non-zero. So you can pass in a null string, it looks like. Wait, no, text end is nullable. So text end. What are we doing here? Oh, okay, so basically this is like you pass in a string and then like a size or the last character that you'll consider. Inside of this code, we're only passing in the label, we don't care. So what they do is they pass in the last character is going to be equal to the maximum possible value, meaning that essentially it's uncapped. While display text end is less than text end, and text display end is not equal to the null termination character, and text display end is not equal to there's no double pound sign, then we move on. So text display end. Okay, so essentially this finds the length of the string, which is a very weird way of saying strlen. You can just do strlen. Basically, you pass in the string, you pass in the final character that you want to consider. So essentially, text plus however long the maximum length would be, and then it'll give you back how long it is until you reach the end of the string. or you reach the text end character, or you reach the double pound, because in IMGUI, the double pound is used for segmenting off unique IDs. I tell you what though, Jolo, I was looking at Discord servers yesterday, after Goku came in and said, "Have you got your Discord started yet?" And I did fire up a simple Discord, but it's not. It's basically still a template. But yeah, I'm going to be looking at doing a little bit more robust. I don't want to make it super complicated. I just want it to be nice. Like, I'm not going to have a gajillion chats in there. Just going to have a couple. Okay, so when we do this check, then label end. Let me go head back to this code. This. We're essentially checking whether I still don't understand. So we pass in a single string. It's as if we are looking for the string length, but we're actually looking for the last character. It's basically a string length measurement. So if we return back with the same, so I guess this is what this is a check whether the string itself is 0 in length. Oh, okay, I get it. So actually they can't just use Sterling. Because if they use Sterling, then it would include the unique identifier stuff with the pound on it. So this is intended to be a catch if you have an empty label that just has pound in front of it to make it a unique identifier. Okay, because the stuff after the double hash is actually hashed and used in the unique ID, but everything before it is not actually part of the label. So we're just checking here whether the label actually exists. So yeah, we can actually get rid of this whole check. And then just pass in position as the label. Okay, I think I'm following. And then label end. In this case, it's, do we need to pass in text end? If text end equals null, text end equals text plus Sterling. Yeah, and that's there's a fix me note on it because Sterling in this case is not very well optimized. That's actually kind of bad because it's measuring it would be, in cases where you don't pass in a length, it would be measuring the length every single frame for every single text item, which is bad. So in this case, instead of letting it do Sterling, I'm going to be doing, is there a compile time Sterling? Considering that this is a constant car, I could probably do size of, now that I'm thinking about it, size of position, because that would get me unsigned long 9 ULL, so it gives me a 9 but the type is wrong. It needs to be of type const char pointer, so I would need to cast that like that. Okay, that would work. And in this case, size of, in the case of the string, this is maybe an unusual use of size of, but I'm passing in a const char string, and so that's essentially an array of characters. Characters being size 1 always. And so this is giving me the value 9 because there's 9 characters in here. Before the, hang on a second, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, so 8 characters plus the null termination character, and then that should be enough for this guy to have a compile time size so that it's not doing Sterling every frame. Cool. And then I'll comment this out. Okay. This is kind of hacked together, but if this works, then I should have exactly the same results as before. And of course it didn't work. Remember reference type. Oh, I forgot to use an arrow here. What is usually better, JSON or config? I'm not sure what you mean by config. JSON is obviously a language that you can use for configuration files. Is config its own language, CFG? I'm not familiar with that. Configuration. I'm not familiar with CFG. I am a fan of not its own language. I am a fan of JSON, but it kind of depends on your use case. I have a preference for YAML over JSON in general, but ultimately it doesn't really matter what language you use for your configuration. I want to know. Okay, I want to know what this is. If it's not its own language, how is it formatted? CFG file. Okay, so this seems pretty simple. This actually reads a lot like an INI file, with the exception that it supports multiple values per key. Like, this is pretty easy to read. It doesn't. I wouldn't say that one is better. I don't have any reason to say that one is better. It is kind of a matter of preference. Depends on your needs. I, for example, use INI files for certain user-facing configurations because they're dead simple. Even though they're technically not supported by Windows anymore, a lot of places will continue to use INI files because they're just so simple to read and write. So, for example, this is a test input context, so this maps keys to whatever, and this is pretty straightforward to read. If a player wants to go in and tweak their own keyboard and gamepad bindings, they can just read this and then kind of like understand, okay, move X is mapped to the gamepad, D-pad, left, right, and whatever, and just work with it. JSON is pretty popular. I think I'm kind of the camp that if you're going to be working with JSON, you might seriously consider using YAML instead, because it solves a lot of the same problems, and it's a little less. There's a little bit less boilerplate, I guess, is a good way to say it. Because like, if we look at a YAML file, and this is an auto-generated one. I didn't make this one. This is from IMGUI. YAML, yeah, YML. Basically, it's like JSON. The big key difference is that you don't have all these you don't have a bunch of braces everywhere and commas everywhere. It makes it relatively straightforward to do stuff. Like if we look at my launch.json file, this is the configuration file for VS Code to be able to launch the debugger. Like the most annoying part of this code is all these commas. Because like if I wanted to add another element to this list, I can't just do that. I have to first add a comma on the previous line and then do that. And then if I accidentally leave an extra comma, I think it causes a problem in some cases, depending on what program is handling the situation. But yeah, with YAML, it's basically like this, except you just sort of do tabs instead of doing all this other business. So if I wanted to have a list of things, so if I have a node and I have a bunch of things underneath it, like you can see how simple the code looks in here. You could either just do a braced list for a node for comma separated values, or you can just tab in and do stuff like that. It's much easier to read. But JSON's been around for longer than YAML, and so yeah. But it doesn't really matter as long as you find it easy to use for your use case. Whatever kind of configuration file you want to work with. Whatever you find that's easy to work with. Okay, so this should be hopefully working. Open up a scene file. Okay, we'll select a sprite. Okay. So it looks like we're mostly there. My re-implementation of the position looks to conform with the implementation of the original. Like it aligns nicely with these other values, these other blocks. However, we are missing the position label. Sent you an example on Discord. Simple values, key value. Yeah, this looks a lot like INI, where you've got the section headers and square brackets. The space separated. Are these whole things? Everything before colons or space? The space separated stuff. This is actually just in its hierarchy. That's interesting. I could see some advantages for that. But you could also just use quoted strings in JSON or whatever for your key. I'm a lumberjack and I'm okay. I sleep all night and work all day. Yeah, this is interesting. It is really readable. Yeah, I'll second that. It's not mainstream, though, to my knowledge. At least not in this field in game development. There's other more popular approaches. JSON, YAML, INI files are more popular. Though to be honest, it's mostly just INI files, JSON. But yeah, it's if you like it, go ahead and work with it. As long it's one of the considerations is whether you have to write your own parser, or whether you should write your own parser. So for example, for INI files for my use case in the engine, I actually did write my own INI parser because I needed to have I needed to extend what INI files could do a little bit, and I really liked the idea of using INI files for like user-facing stuff. But for YAML, I use a library, YAML CVP, because it makes things way simpler to write stuff out from code. Okay, so let's figure out what went wrong with the text. So inside of drag float 3, and drag scalar in. At some point we draw the text. And I thought that it was this call, IamGUI text dx. But it didn't. It's a simple call. It looks like really easy to read, and it didn't work for some reason. Passing in a constant car pointer to the text. Curious to know whether if I just comment out the size of stuff, I wonder if that works better. Oh, interesting. Okay, so there must be something up with my logic here, where I was doing a constant car pointer of size of position. Size of being 9. I'm going to set a breakpoint there and see what happens. First we have to open up a scene file, then we have to expand transform, and then it'll break. And then I'm gonna step into this call. Oh, right. So this is text end is actually looking for the character. It's looking for the character that represents the end of the string. So it's looking for the null termination character. So I've just been passing it the value of 9 as a size, but I actually need to pass something like this. I'm not sure if how well that'll work, but we'll see. So position, this gets us the location of position, and then we got size of position. So this will give us the null termination character, right? What do you think about that? Because there's this will give us the null termination character address for this string. Oh, but I still have the program running. I keep forgetting to terminate when I go to rebuild. That'll get less annoying as soon as we've got hot reloading working, but all right. We got a question mark at the end. Because the size of needs to be -1. Size of will get me 9. And then 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 will include the null termination character. Apparently it's looking for the second to last, or it's actually looking for number 8. So this all seems kind of hacky, but we'll consider cleaning it up after we're done. Fuck it, I'll just add in +8. There's a warning that I'll need to silence, but we'll set that aside for a minute. Okay, there we go. So now we've got an implementation of the multi-component position that we can do some tweaking on. And let's do that. So here where we've got the drag scalar section, we could add the drag scalar again, but change from change from this format string from %.3f, and we can change that to just dashes, and then hopefully that'll do what I want. Do I know Microsoft Docker? I'm afraid I don't. What is Microsoft Docker? Not sure. Why are you asking if you're not sure? A Visual Studio Code extension. Open source project for automating deployment of applications as portable on cloud or on premises. So it's a deployment solution, it looks like. Yeah, Docker deploys containers at all layers of the hybrid cloud. So this is kind of like if you're if you are trying to if you're doing some like web-based stuff and you want to deploy. I want to find out. Yeah, be worth looking into. I'm not myself very interested in doing web-based stuff, but there's a lot of money in it, so it's for sure worth looking into. Okay, so I had before done these booleans as their own things. I'm going to do them as arrays, and there's a reason for that. We'll see why in a minute. Okay. And then when we go to set these, we'll be setting the same value as above. So I can actually probably do these in a loop. Let me do that real quick. There we go. We'll do the same thing here. Yeah, no problem, man. Thanks for being here. Okay, good. And good. And we'll wrap this whole thing as well. Okay. All right. Okay. This wasn't the reason why I wanted to change these two arrays. The reason why was because down here, I can take this loop and extend this loop to do the check for is pause aligned. We're already looping through for all this code for every single box, and I can simply take advantage of that to check for each individual axis. We'll say if the is pause aligned, else I will do the same code, but, well, you know what, I could do a little bit better. Instead of doing the if else, I'll just use a ternary expression. So we'll say is pause aligned question mark, and if it is aligned, then we will use %.3f for the 3 digits, 3 decimal points on the float. If it's not, then we will use dash dash dash, which will just display dashes, yet still preserve the functionality of the drag scaler. That might be awesome. That might be exactly what I want. However, I still got some issues to sort out down here, because I changed these two. I changed these two being arrays of bools, so we'll need to do for I equals 0 minus less than 3 I plus plus, and then it is pause aligned at I, and then yeah. Oh, that's not going to work because I have to name the X, Y, and Z. So this will be is pause aligned 0, 1, and 2. Like so. And then these as well. Okay. All right, let's see how that works. Okay, transform seems to be functional. Selecting multiples, we've got dashes, which is far better than saying not a number. That's a lot more explicit. And then when I go to do some dragging, it'll work. Now, one thing that's not working is I can't set these values if there are dashes. So let's think through how we can do that. So the drag scaler does report whether the value has changed for any one of these. What I could do, instead of doing this value changed for all 3 elements, I could do for each individual element have a bool. So actually what I'll do is I'll do pause axis changed and make it a array again. Like that. And then down here we will set pause axis changed at I equal to the return value of drag scaler. So at the end of this loop, I'll have a Boolean that'll tell me whether I am GUI has tried to change the value. And if it has, then down here we can set it. So instead of using is pause aligned for this, I would use pause axis changed, which is out of scope because of course it is. So we'll put the Boolean We should actually be putting all of these in here. All these stack allocated variables don't need to be put on the stack unless we actually have a transform component to display. So I move those down, and now we've got bool pos access changed, and then down here, when we go to set the values back to the engine, pos axis changed is what determines whether we are updating the values. Let's see how that works. Okay, so for basics, the component seems to be working. If I select multiples and we got dashes, aha! Look at that. That's dope. So what's happened here is that if I've got components that differ on each of their positions, I can still click and drag and it'll automatically align them. Something weird's happening here on the Y though, and the Z. So I must have a typo somewhere. Because it's updating correctly on, the text is updating correctly on the first axis, but not the second or the third. Oops, sorry. Bumped my mic. So what am I missing? So for some reason or other, when we get back to this point, the Y and the Z axes, when we go to submit to the drag scaler, it's thinking that pos aligned at whatever axis is always false. Let me run this again and try and figure out what the pattern is. Okay, so when we multi-select, okay, so selecting sprites 1 and 2, they only differ on the x-axis. Adding sprite 3. Okay, interesting. Sprites 1, 2, and 3 only differ on the x-axis. Yet when I select sprites 2 and 3, all 3 axes show dashes. This isn't the case for selecting sprites 1 and 2 though. How about okay, at this point none of the entities differ on the z-axis. Yet for some reason a lot of them seem to think that they do. There's got to be a typo in here somewhere. so we're starting off with pause aligned is true, pause axis change is false. Okay, I think here's the problem. Yeah. Okay, I had gone and put this into a loop structure, forgetting that you don't index axis on the position, or can't you? Can you do something like that on GLM vectories? Because if you could, that would be pretty nice, actually. Okay, there is an operator for return the count of components of the vector for length. Okay. Component accesses. Okay, alright, so it looks like this is intended to be a way to access the components. So I can just use square brackets. That's pretty handy. Okay, that should have fixed the bug. I'll worry about cleaning up the readability later. Let's make sure that everything is working. Open scene. Cool, got the scene. All right, cool. So now we've got something that's a little bit more correct. When I select all of these, they all differ on the X and the Y. If I select all of them in a row, they only differ on the X. If I select from the same column, they only differ on the Y. Cool. And none of them differ on the Z. All right, so if I was to drag these, they suddenly find themselves snapped to each other, which is nice. And I'm sure the same thing would go for these. If I set their Y position to 5, all of a sudden they find themselves at 5. That is so much nicer. Now that I've got this going, it's going to be a lot easier to use the inspector for these items. Let me reload the scene. So you can use the... Eventually, the primary way that you'll be moving things around will be by clicking and dragging widgets. But if you have like multiple entities and you're just like, okay, I need these all to be on 5 or whatever, then you can just double click and type. Okay, that didn't work. Okay, so there's a thing that we need to fix. I can click and drag and set it to 5. But if they don't match and I type in 5, that doesn't seem to update. Huh. Okay. So drag scalar doesn't, from what I can tell, drag scalar doesn't return true upon typing in a number. Which is not what I expected. Drag scalar returns true if you have drug, but not if you have typed in a new number. Let me Google this, because this is probably a question that's come up a lot. Okay, there's a thing here called is item deactivated after edit. What does that do? Return is item deactivated. We get global active ID previous frame has been edited before, or we don't have an active ID and the active ID has been edited before. Okay, so this appears to be the Boolean that would tell us that we have pressed enter and submitted a new number. So what I would do then is I would say pause access equals this. Or this. That might not be super easy to understand, so what I'll do instead of doing this for business, I will do pause access changed at I or equal to is item deactivated after edit. So this will set it to true if we have changed the value by dragging, or if we have submitted by typing. Let's see how that works. Open scene. Okay, there you are. And we've got a couple of entities selected that disagree on the X position. I'm going to type in 5 and press enter. And nothing happened. Okay, that wasn't the silver bullet I was hoping for. How about if I type in 5? That was weird. Hang on. What was the difference? It just worked. And I don't understand why. Or maybe it didn't work. Maybe I had accidentally clicked and dragged. So there's a couple of these flags that might be useful. Is item edited? Looks pretty nice. There's is item deactivated after edit, and is item edited. I think this might be referring to simply that the value has changed. Oops, I gotta close the editor. All right, relink. All right, which might mean that it would be live updating while I'm typing. That would actually be nice as well. So we got the text. Type in 1. Aha. All right, that seems to be exactly what the doctor ordered. I go to select multiple entities. I can drag them to put them into the same position, or I can just type in a value and then put them wherever I want. Great, okay, and most importantly, the dashes are used to tell us when these items disagree on a thing. So this is actually a much more usable interface. So sprite 1 and sprite 1 here, they disagree on all axes. I can put them to the same z-axis immediately. I can put them to a specific y by typing in a value. Oh, why isn't that working? I thought that was a total solution, but apparently there's some issues. So this one's got a 0 value on the y. This one's got a 5 value on the y. Okay, worked that time. Seems kind of temperamental. Okay, how about these guys? I put them on I can't think of a good reason why these might have worked sometimes and not worked other times. I can't seem to reproduce the problem now. But it does seem like everything is largely working. Alright, so what I'll do then is I'll put that strange disagreement on the back burner and I'll implement this for the rotation and the scale. And once I've done that, I think that's the minimum that we need for a transform editor. After that, we're going to be looking at other stuff. And I'm not sure what I want to do next, actually, because there's quite a lot of things to look at next. How long have I been going? For an hour and a half. Let me get this done, and then I'll consider whether I want to do more live coding today. Okay, so for starters, let's make sure we've got values for everything that we need. We've got pos floats 3, is pos aligned 3. I probably don't even need to make these arrays anymore. I'll continue to use drag float 3 for the rotation because it can actually be done a lot simpler if I was just to do an if statement around this. If rot is rot aligned, then we will do this drag float 3. Otherwise, we'll do this with dashes like that, because we're going to be doing dashes either way. But for drag float 3 on the position and the scale, we're actually going to be directly accessing the X, Y, and Z. So we can actually do away with this. Do away with pos floats 3 and scale floats 3. It's got is pos aligned, and then pos axis changed. We'll say is rot aligned and bool is rot, oh sorry, rot is rot changed, like that. And we'll keep doing the float rots 3 because we have to pass in a contiguous block of this memory for IMGUI. Cool. We got is scale aligned, and then bool scale axis changed. Like that. Okay, good. We no longer need this code or this code. We do need this code. Now we're going to loop through every entity after the first one. We don't need we're not accessing pos floats anymore. We will be accessing the entity's position. So what we'll be doing is entity pool at entity indices at dereferencing the entity iterator, dot position, and we can access X, Y, and Z using the I value. So we're checking to see whether, actually we'll use the 0 value. So we're checking to see whether the first selected entity, whether its position on that axis. Wait, no, that's not right. This would be, it's a little awkward on the coding. Okay, so we're comparing the first entity in the entity pool. So the first selected entity, we're getting its position out of the entity pool. We're comparing that against the one that we're iterating against now. And we're checking to see whether its axis on I, so X, Y, or Z, 0, 1, or 2, equals the one that we've iterated to. And if any of them are unaligned, we mark is pos aligned at I to false. All right. Rotation code will look the same. We can just copy and paste to replace the scale stuff here. Like that. Cool. And then down here inside of the transform header, I wonder if there's a way to force it to have it open by default. Default open? Okay, that's really easy, and I wish I had done that before. So now the transform component header will automatically be open by default, which is what I want. Cool position, current context, begin group, push ID position, push multiple item widths. We're not using pos floats at I anymore. Instead, we're going to be passing in for the scalar the address of the specific position value. So that'll be position at I. Are we still in that loop? Yes. But the end of the iterator. Oh, that's... Oh, right, we're going to be using the first one. So we'll do selected entities dot begin. I'm not really liking this very much. The whole getting an iterator and dereferencing it, and then using that as a key all over the place. It seems like a hack. I should probably instead find a way to cache the first element. And so I'm not having to do all this object construction for very little reason. I mean, technically this isn't construction, is it? No, it is. You construct the iterator when you do this. I'll come back to that in a minute. But we've got the code here for the position. Going on, good. Then the rotation is just this code here, though we do need to do that extra line. This guy, ImGUI is item edited, needs to be updated. So we'll say on the is rote aligned, we'll say is rote changed equals on those, and then at the end of this we'll say is rote changed. We will or equal to ImGUI is item changed or edited. That's the one. Cool. And then that's rotation. And then we will basically copy and paste this code for the scale. We'll have to change the labels, of course. Yeah. So this will be scale, these will be scale, this will be the length of scale, -1. Okay. So we've got some errors down here from when we got rid of the array of float positions. And this is where we set the axes back. So, while I don't need to do a float array anymore, I think I am going to do a simple cache. Oh, sweet. Sounds like I got a follow. I wasn't paying attention and I missed what just happened. Thanks for the follow. I got the sound cue, but I didn't actually see anything popping up on my screen or in my chat. So I missed what it was. Yeah, I think I might have accidentally hidden my bot commands from my overlay. Hey Yoshi boy. Thanks for the follow. Yeah, it's going pretty good. I've been wrapping up some improvements for my game engine's transform editor, which we only kind of got working yesterday. And as soon as I'm done with that, I'll have to have a decision to make as to what things to work on next on my engine. How are you doing? I'm gonna need to cache the position. Doing good, just learning the .NET framework, PowerShell, Batch, etc. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, it sounds like it. Are you doing C# with your .NET, or are you doing .NET with C++ or something else? I can actually immediately cache the edited position. So this will be from the entity pool, entity indices at selected entities.begin, like that. Just the .NET framework, mainly C# and Visual Basic. Yeah. Yeah, for me, I haven't really spent too much time with Visual Basic. It was a language that I learned a little bit at my community college along like 12 years ago. But yeah, C# is, so inextricably tied to .NET. It really takes advantage of the .NET framework and makes it really kind of intuitive to use. Yeah. I haven't used too much C#, but I know it and I know how to use it. Mostly so that I could work in Unity, but what are your interests in these topics? Are you a student, or are you aspiring programmer? What I've done just here is I've just cached the first selected entities, position and scale. And then I can use those instead of having to look them up all the time. Just programming is a hobby. That's good. That's a totally valid answer. Gotta rack my 14-year-old brain somehow. Oh, you're only 14? Yeah, you're off to a good start. And it's too early to be thinking about locking yourself into a career. Definitely. Okay. So what I've got here is I've cached the first element's position, and I'm going to compare that against the rest, and then edit it if necessary, and then push it if necessary. And that's just a little bit nicer. Slightly better performance-wise and easier to read. Well, if I want to be a programmer later in life, I might as well start now. Yeah, that's true. You know, get started early. For sure. I think I was probably around your age when I first started getting interested in programming, though I've only taken it very far the last couple of years. It's always just been a hobby, and a rewarding hobby for sure, but okay, position floats. These are going to be edited position at 0, 1, and 2. And these are going to be edited scales. There we go. So entity pool. So we're assigning back to the entity pool the edited scale, the edited positions, and the edited floats. If those things have been edited. Except right now I need to change this to be scale axis changed. Just doing a quick proofread to make sure I don't have any typos. Just figured out batch variables. Nice. I think batch scripting and PowerShell scripting, like, it's sort of undersold as a programmer tool. At least it was for me when I was getting started. Like, because if you know how to do stuff in batch, then you can do a huge amount of stuff on your computer. Yeah, it's a lot simpler than it looks at the outset too, because it's just using the command line, but you put it in a file and then it does it automatically. But yeah, batches are really useful. You're climbing up the right tree. There we go. Rotor line, entity pool, Euler rotation hint. Yep. Okay, that's looking correct. Yeah, glad to hear you're having a good time with it. Okay, there's a couple of places here where I haven't switched to the correct thing. So we got pause axis changed. This needs to be scale axis changed. And this needs to be scale aligned, and this needs to be scale axis changed. Yeah, we can just call batch the command prompt language. Yep, basically. They're also universally helpful for build systems and things like that, because you're going to find yourself in a lot of situations where you're just going to need to automate something on the command line. I have PowerShell scripts I have PowerShell scripts wrapped in command lines in some cases, in batch files, in my engine. If I go to, there's gendocs. This is an interesting one. So throughout my game engine code, wherever I have an API, and I'll show an example real quick. If I go to like input.h, that's the editor, input.h in the engine. The public one, give me the public one, please. This guy. Over the top of all of these API calls that I give to game developers, I have documentation explaining what they do. I have a batch script here that runs a program called Doxygen, but before it does a big file process command where it takes all of my markdown files that I use in my documentation and it wraps them inside of a namespace. And so this is literally just a PowerShell command, but it's being called from a batch file. And that makes it a little bit simpler with some computer systems disallow, like IT administrators just straight up turn off PowerShell, where you're not allowed to run PowerShell scripts, but you can run them if you open up the command prompt and do it. So you can just run a batch wrapper around PowerShell. Then this whole thing generates the website for the HTML documentation. That would be like docs 32. So it goes through this process of wrapping. If we take a look at this whole thing, it goes through a process of wrapping markdown files, converts them into .dox files. If I can find some. Here, these guys. And then it takes those and converts them into a website with all of the documentation that I want. Yeah. And there's just 10 billion uses for batch files. You'll use them everywhere. I wonder why this is giving me trouble. Cannot open file enterprise. Do I have configuration provider? Oh, I had accidentally turned on my configuration provider. Okay. This is something that I had identified as a problem in my previous stream. And not my most previous stream, but a couple of streams ago. Apparently there's a bug with Cmake Tools, and I think I've isolated what it is. I just have to produce a minimum viable example and then file a bug report. So Cmake Tools is normally set as your configuration provider, and what that does is it tells IntelliSense where to find files and how everything's supposed to work and stuff like that. But I found a couple of places where it's just broken. So if I go to graphics.h, this guy, it notoriously triggers this bug. And the reason why is because what it does is it mostly just, it doesn't have an associated CPP file for starters. It just includes these other headers. And I think under the hood, Cmake Tools requires that a CPP file be found, or that it needs to find a CPP file that implements this header before it'll resolve the dependencies correctly. So if I go to a file that actually does include graphics.h, such as renderer2d, which utilizes graphics.h here, and then I go back to this, it suddenly can find all the references. So I haven't quite submitted a bug request, and if I do, it'll be a while before it's fixed. So I'm literally just turning off Cmake Tools as the configuration provider and telling Visual Studio myself where to find all of the includes, and that seems to be working quite a lot better. For the most part. What's up with you? Why are you, okay, just take a second to clear is all. All right, back to where we were. We're updating the entities with the edits. Position, rotation, scale. I think that's it. Let me compile that and confirm it's working. Redefinition of G. Yeah, we don't need that to be redefined. Okay. We got a couple of warnings from this pointer logic. I'll come back to that because I don't want to be seeing that warning. But for now, we've got the editor going, we've got the basic scene with all these entities in it, and now I need to confirm that the rotation on these guys works correctly. So let's pick a sprite. This guy, Link down here, will futz with his rotation a little bit. We'll select an adjacent sprite, we'll futz with its rotation a little bit. We'll select them both. We find that the entire rotation is out of sync. Okay, and when I go to click and drag, it's not changing anything. If I go to type something, it also doesn't change anything. Okay, so we've still got a problem on rotation. We're going to need to come back to that. However, scale was pretty much copied and pasted from the position code, so it should be working all right. Let's change. Okay, we got a problem with scale as well. When I go to change the scale of the sprite 1, which I think is Madeline here, and sprite 2, it just kind of goes right back to what it used to be. It doesn't actually update. So I've got a typo somewhere in there. So if scale access changed, we assign scale.x, y, and z to be edited scale. That makes sense. So maybe edited scale is not being updated correctly. Huh. Oh, yeah. So the drag scaler is here. I went and cached the yeah, okay. Whoopsie. I went and cached the value for editing, and I just wanted to directly edit it here, and then from there push that to the entity list. I instead was pushing it to the entity pool directly, and then resetting it back to the cached value, and that was setting everything back to the way it was before I started. So that needs to be edited scale, and this needs to be the address of edited position at I. This is good content, lol. I try. I find this kind of development interesting, and sometimes I just get bored doing it by myself, so I stream. Okay, there we go. I'm thinking this probably will work fine. So first we'll confirm that, yeah, okay, so these will align their axes if disaligned. Let me unalign them again. So now sprite 1 and sprite 2, they differ on the X, Y, and Z, so now we've got dashes to indicate that. If I go to edit 1, it'll lock that axis together. And now they're all on the same exact position. Perfect. Now let's confirm rotation does the same thing. So we'll rotate Link a little bit, and we'll rotate Madeline a little bit. and we select them both. Okay, so we still got to work on rotation. How about scale? So we'll select Madeline, make Madeline a big, long person. I'm glad you are. And then Link, I will make you a big, chunky boy. All right. Now, when I select them both, their scales differ on all axes. Now, okay, so good. Their axes are aligning independently when I go to make edits. That's good. Z doesn't apply. I don't know why I'm fucking with Z, because these are flat sprites. I don't have a Z. But yeah, it looks like the sprite size and position are all working perfectly. So now there's just this question about getting the rotations to lock correctly. Getting there. Yeah, so rotations, I was kind of just trying to get away with using the same multi-float drag float 3 that IMQE provides that rolls everything into one. But it looks like I'm going to need to do something a little bit more complicated. C# is a good scripting language. Yeah, it does a pretty good job. C# is, I've got some mixed feelings about it. I think that for a lot of the use cases that it's used for, it's great. Game development is kind of a weird one. It's kind of a gray area for me, whether C# is good for game development. It's good for hacking stuff together in a reasonably performant way, for sure. And you can do a lot of cool stuff with it that you can't do with that you can't easily do with things like C++. But yeah, being able to manage your own memory in C#, I think, would be it's kind of hard to imagine C# without garbage collection, because it's so intrinsically tied into it, where everything that you do, every object that you create that's not a struct, that's not a value type, is automatically put onto the heap, and then that's automatically garbage collected. But like being able to do low level stuff like that is something that I miss when I work in C#. I haven't taken a look at REST yet. I know there's a lot of people who are really into it, and I know that it solves a lot of problems people have with C++. Yeah, part of the huge problem with C++ is that they just try to make they're kind of bound to making things backwards compatible in a way that sort of just makes it hard to progress. So I'm really looking forward to a widely adopted C++ replacement, whether that's Rust or whether that's Jai or whether that's Odin or one of the others. Probably not Google's though, just because a lot of people are, yeah, a lot of people disagree with Carbon. Yeah, maybe I'll have to take a look at Rust as well. It doesn't have like from what I understand, it's got something called the borrow checker. I'm not really sure how that works, but it's like it's got its own things that you need to wrangle with. Yeah, I've mentioned this a couple of times on other streams, but the one I'm really looking forward to is Jonathan Blow's Jai language, JAI. That looks kind of promising. I don't really care too much for Jonathan Blow as a person, but I think he's got the right goals and the right approach for developing the Jai language. Hey, Double Walks. Welcome in. I'm on the fence as to how to handle the rotation thing, because these work great. How's your day going? Pretty well. I've got a pretty decent looking transform component section now. What we spent a little while working on was coming up with, and this is mostly IM-GUI code, coming up with a way to better represent the fact that certain axes don't align. So I select sprite 1 and 2, they agree on everything except for the position on the x-axis, and then also doing it in such a way that you can just like make them align. Oh, that's not working anymore. Hang on. I just tried to type in a replacement value. Okay, now it works. What the heck? Sometimes that doesn't work for some reason, and I'm not sure why. But, you know, be able to just take and snap things to the same value, like this. They were at different values, now they're the same height, now they're the same width. But yeah, so that's going pretty well. I'm just kind of dealing with rotations now, which rotations have kind of a slightly different concern, because everything that you do with rotations, when you affect one, you're going to be affecting the rest, because if you have two objects that disagree on a rotation, you're not going to say that they agree on a roll, pitch, or yaw, because no matter which order you apply the Euler rotations, the second and the third are always dependent on the first, and so you can't just say, oh, they have the same roll, and you can just pass you can just pass that through. It's not transitive, in other words. But I need to come up with a way to make it easier to set these to be identical values. I'm gonna take a little break. I've been going at this for 2 hours and 15 minutes. When I come back, I'm gonna be tackling this problem with rotation. And after that, I'm not sure what I want to do. I might keep working. I might play a game. I might actually start working on a bug report for Cmake Tools for that issue that I've been dealing with. Now that I've got it, now that I've got it kind of isolated. I'll be back in like, I don't know, let's say 10 minutes or so. See you in a little bit. Alrighty, I'm back. In another 10 minutes or so, I'm gonna need to step away to get some eggs that I put into the boil. I'm gonna hard boil some eggs. But thanks, Double Walks. It's good to be back. Yeah, let's take a look at the rotations now. So here we go. So for starters, rotations are not following the same code as I used for the scale and position. Scale and position, we set up this thing based off of the drag float 3 code. And then I kind of just skipped over doing my own implementation because I thought that I could get away with just making these edits, switching between either doing one string or the other. To be a little more correct, I probably could have done something like this. To write simpler code, I should say. I probably could have done something like this. If it's aligned, then we display the value. Otherwise, we display the dashes. Like that. This is a little bit easier to read. But for some reason or other, I still can't change from whatever the old value was to the new one. And I'm thinking that might have to do with the fact that we're editing 3 floats at once. Yeah, what do you want to ask, Devil? Take a sip of my tea. Well, I call it tea, but it's more of a juice cocktail by Arizona. Oops. Not really sure what I'm missing. Okay, so this one's got a slightly different rotation. These two selected, the whole thing is blacked out. I'm not able to do edits by clicking and dragging. If I type something, nothing happens. It's like isRoteChanged is not being used for anything. Oh, that's probably the whole problem. I didn't change from using the isRote align to isRoteChanged. Okay. That actually this whole thing might have just been a typo. What graphics API would you recommend using, such as Windows API for graphics, not including whether someone is or isn't a beginner? Well, that last sentence kind of screws up the rest of the question for me, because whether you're a beginner or not really does factor into what API you want to use. Let me really quick just confirm that the rotation started working. I am using OpenGL for this project because I'm not a graphics programmer. Okay, sweet. Yeah, the rotation is fixed. Yes. All right. I'm using OpenGL for this project because I'm not a graphics programmer. I am learning graphics programming while I'm doing this project, and it's the simplest of the APIs. It organizes things in such a way that makes it easier for you as a programmer to understand, but it also isn't very performant in some ways. Like, you can make very high performance OpenGL code, don't get me wrong, but you have to really work to make sure that your OpenGL code is performant. Just doing it the intuitive way is going to be a little bit slow. If you are more advanced than either DirectX or Vulkan on Windows are good choices. The first advantage to DirectX is that it's first-party supported. You could argue that it's got the best support on Windows, but it's Windows only, so if you want to do multi-platform anything, then you have to support an additional graphics API on top of DirectX. Vulkan is great because it's supported by a lot of platforms, But there is still the big exception of Mac OS. And on Mac OS, at the very least, you have second-party support. That is, Apple doesn't support Vulkan, but Kronos Group has a thing called, I think it's Molten VK, or TK? Molten VK, I think, where you can use Vulkan code, and in Kronos Group's adapter will automatically convert that into correct code for the use with Metal, which is supported by Apple. So it's like, it's not quite as good as first-party support, but it is at least second-party support and not third-party support. Because the same guys who are making Vulkan are making Molten VK. So yeah, I don't know. It's there's no best for all ages. If you're beginning, I think it's obviously OpenGL. Even if you're a pretty good programmer, graphics programming is its own thing. It's a category of programming that is by its nature kind of difficult to wrap your head around, and it's kind of hard to debug sometimes, depending on your environment. But yeah, OpenGL for beginners, DirectX, if you're not a beginner and you're on Windows only, Vulkan if you're doing multi-platform advanced, and you don't want to be using multiple APIs. OpenGL is what you're currently learning. Yeah, I think that's a good starting point. Though it is kind of hard to adjust, because like there's a whole bunch of good resources out there for OpenGL learning, but a lot of times they'll give you only like half of the truth, or they'll give you like an answer that applies in specific cases but not in general cases, or things that are just outdated because OpenGL's been around for a while. I think after I've got my engine off the ground, I'm going to be switching to Vulkan, and probably will have to be redoing my graphics API as a result. I have done my best to abstract away the which graphics API I'm using, but not being somebody who uses Vulkan or DirectX and somebody who's also new to OpenGL, I've probably structured my own graphics API in a way that doesn't lend itself well to Vulkan, so I'll probably have to make some changes. If you draw OpenGL from the graphics card, isn't it shouldn't be farther up to date than Windows version of OpenGL? I guess I'm not following. If you draw OpenGL from the graphics card, shouldn't it be further up to date than Windows version of OpenGL? I guess I'm not really understanding the question, because the Windows version of OpenGL always comes into it. Whenever you're working with OpenGL, you're using you're always using the Windows library for OpenGL. I think it's just opengl.dll. I think it's literally what it's called. It's probably in my debug list here somewhere. Yeah, OpenGL 32.dll. And so like you're always you always have to have support by the platform in the general case. If you don't have support by the platform, then you have to have somebody who added support to the platform, or you have to add the support yourself. So like, for example, there's folks who are working on a third-party OpenGL implementation on Mac OS, and it's basically like a wrapper for Metal. And I can't quite remember what it's called, but it's not Kronos Group. Oh, here we go. I think this is the one that I saw. Yeah, and I've already got an upvote on it. Somebody is working on OpenGL for macOS Metal, and basically you just like write your OpenGL and your GLSL just like normal, and then the library takes care of it for you. But yeah, whether you have support is kind of not up to you. If you're shipping to any old user, then you kind of have to play with what they have. And that's probably the biggest argument for why you should support multiple graphics APIs. Because if you do Vulkan, and then for whatever weird reason their computer doesn't support Vulkan, like it doesn't have like a graphics driver or a card that can handle Vulkan, because it was made too early or something like that, then you want to have a fallback so that they can still play your game or play your use your application on their computer. So you might fall back to OpenGL, for example, if Vulkan is not available. You might fall back to a software renderer, and that's something that I haven't done, but I may do at some point. A software renderer is basically just you do everything CPU side, and then you just use whatever platform API to literally just push those colors to the screen, and you're not even using hardware acceleration at all in those cases. So like on Windows, it'd be just like you write all the colors to the CPU buffer that you're working on, and then from there you like use GDI or something to push it to the screen. So it's always good to have fallbacks in place. Okay, I'm gonna go and get my eggs out of the pot because they've been boiling for a little bit. I'll be back in a couple of minutes after I've got them on some ice. Yeah. Sorry, that took longer than I thought. Cool. And where were we? Yeah, we had just gotten rotations working. I think this is actually probably all I need to have done for my rotations. Which sprites have I got selected now? Yeah, so like if I select multiples of these and I go to change a rotation, they work independently. And then if I go to set one value, they'll all be locked to the same. And same thing goes for position, same thing goes for scale. Make them really, really tall. That's really big. Yeah, so I'm not really sure what I want to do now. What's the next step? Let me reset the scene. Arguably, this is all. Arguably, the transform section of the inspector and the multi-select in the hierarchy are finished. Everything else for position, rotation, scale is kind of a nice to have. Because there's a lot of little things I need to do next. If I wanted to, I could keep going on the inspector and have and come up with an inspector that reflects custom component types. So obviously each of these components or each of these entities have components attached to them that are not the transform. Transform's a property of the entity, not a component, technically speaking. I could also look at mouse picking, and so we could start adding, like, you can select with the left mouse button inside of the scene view and then start adding things like widgets. That's another valid approach. We could start working on file things, so like being able to save and load and reload files. Let's take a look at the Trello board. We could also just start fixing little bugs before moving on. It's a little early to be talking about the content pipeline because we haven't quite gotten the systems pipeline set up yet. We could be looking at setting up a native menu bar, which is kind of important. It's not critical. When I go to up here, use file, edit, view, help, or whatever, all of this stuff is added via IMGUI. And that works all right, but it's not perfect. I really do want to be using the Windows API to be doing the file edit and view, because you can use the Windows API's keyboard shortcuts to handle things like Control S, Control Q, Control Z, and all the keyboard shortcuts that we might want to add. And that makes it a lot easier to integrate with the menu bar. In addition, this sort of doesn't work on Mac OS. I mean, it works. Like if you go to build what I have on GitHub now on Mac OS and you run the editor, you will have the file edit, view menus, and whatever, but they're within the bounds of the window and not on the menu bar, which is what you probably should have on Mac OS. And Mac OS, I think, has its own API for doing quick keys that I'd probably want to use instead of something internal to the application. So that's actually probably a big one. I'll put that up higher than these others. Oh yeah, and docking is entirely missing on Mac OS. So one of the huge benefits of IMGUI is the ability to do this, to be able to take and undock a window and put it like on a different screen or whatever. If I can get the edge, just to be able to do this at all and like have multiple views going on. That's a huge perk and one of the main reasons why I decided to go into IMGUI. However, the IMGUI does not support this on Mac OS quite yet. Or to be more specific, it doesn't directly support this on Mac OS. Like if you were using GLFW, GLFW wraps whether you're using Windows or Mac OS anyway. And there is a GLFW implementation for IMGUI that does support for extra windows. And that does work. But I would, in order for this to work with my custom windowing code, I will have to implement myself this feature. So that might be something I need to do sooner than later. This is one I probably should take care of now, actually. Let me take a look at that. Solve debug release CRT selection. On Windows, there's a crash when debugging games in the release editor. This occurs because there's a debug CRT and a release CRT. Yeah, so this is probably an interesting topic to at least talk about, even if I don't fully resolve it today. So CRT stands for the C runtime. When you go to use standard library things in your applications, that standard library stuff comes from the CRT. And in order for you to even do any of that stuff, you have to link the library. And you can, on Windows, you can choose to either statically link your runtime or you can dynamically link it. In most cases, it's better to dynamically link it, so that way it's not loaded multiple times in memory, and so that Windows can update it independent of you updating it. So if there's like a big huge bug in the CRT, and Microsoft needs to push out an emergency fix, you don't have to then yourself re-push out your application to your users. So you can see here, I've got, when I go to my debug console and I filter down to CRT, we've got the library in question, msvcrt.dll. There's actually multiple versions of the CRT. There's a regular one, and there's a debug one. And when we are in debug mode, we are, or debug configuration, we are using the debug one. If I go into dev configuration, or release configuration, and this compilation might take a minute because I haven't compiled in dev configuration for a good long while. These use optimized builds. They ask the compiler to do optimizations on them that the debug build doesn't have. And then in addition to that, they link to the debug CRT, or sorry, the release CRT. So let me pull up the stuff on this. There's some documentation about this. There's a specific article I'm thinking of. Related to the differences between the debug and standard runtime. I can't really find the article that I'm thinking of right now. But the gist is that when you go to compile a project with the debug or the full version of the DLL, you can run into issues with DLL boundaries. So the way that the editor and the launcher targets work is that you will compile a module, a DLL for your game, and then they will at runtime link to them. So I'll open up the bin folder in File Explorer real quick. Reveal in File Explorer. So in here we've got the build products for the engine, the launcher, the editor, and the game. So normally when you're working inside the editor, it'll build a DLL, and then that's loaded in. If this DLL was linked against the release version of the CRT, and the editor was linked against the debug version, or vice versa, you can't really pass standard objects between these programs anymore, between these binaries. So I've just finished building the dev configuration for the editor. I'm going to run it, and I'm going to show what I made. So it shows here that we've got the enterprise editor open with the test game project loaded, and if we go to the debug console and we search for test game .dll, we do see that debug test game module test game.dll has been loaded. Now notice that it says debug here, and that's because the EP project file, this is the actual file representing the game project, specifies that the editor should be using the debug or should prefer the debug version of the game module. It's going to be looking inside of this folder for the module, even though we're running the editor in development build, right? So it loaded up correctly. It didn't. There's no problems yet because all it did was link to the game project and invoke the very basic game entry points. But as soon as I go to hit play, we got a breakpoint triggered. So there's a pause on exception, and we got a throw bad alloc heap exception apparently. And if I clear out the filters, yeah, the console, I think I might have accidentally just cleared the console. But if we go up the stack, it doesn't really tell us what went wrong. And it's like we're into load context file for the input system, and then accessing an STD map, I think, and then we just have a crash. And the reason why that occurred was because the CRTs differ between the DLL we loaded and the editor. So what I've been doing is I've just been kind of ignoring the problem. I've gone into the project file and I've said, when you load this project, load the development, load the development configuration one. And if I go to run the editor again, it says test game project on the title bar because we loaded it. And if we look for it inside of the debug console, test game.dll, it says that we are now loading from build bin dev test game module. So we're loading the development version of this now. And so if I was to run it and hit play, it suddenly works. And that's because it's both the DLL and the editor are able to agree on what an STD map is and all the other stuff from the CRT. STD map might not be a great example because that's technically a templated type, but you know what I mean. So this is actually kind of a large problem because if we think through what a shipping editor would look like, it would look like a program that you can install on any computer using like an install wizard, right? You download an exe, you double click it, and then it says, where would you like to install, or something like that, and then it'll put everything that needs to go on your computer where it needs to go. In general, it'll be located in program files. Oops, that's not what I thought it was going to do. In general, that's going to be in program files. Inside of the enterprise folder, we got the executables, the library DLL, we've got developer resources, including the includes, the GLSL includes, and things like that. But once it's there, you've only got one configuration of the editor. You've only got whatever I shipped in release mode, which means that the editor will always, with a capital A, always link to the release CRT. Which kind of leaves you at in a bit of a pickle with the debug versions of your game, because you're going to want to be running, you're going to want to be able to run debug code in the editor. You won't be doing that all the time, but if you're testing out a new feature, then yeah, absolutely, you're going to want to either run the game code in development or in the debug configuration either through the editor or through the launcher, because the launcher, the whole point of it, remember, is that it's going to be a hot reloadable version of your game. It'll act like it's in standalone, but it's hot reloadable. So yeah, the question is kind of open a little bit. Like, how do you prevent those crashes in that situation? And I had, at one point, asked the good folks on Reddit about this. This is a while ago. I was thinking about this problem. Let me find... I'm going to look for the post that I had asked. Here it is. Explicitly loading MSBCRT in an editor application. I asked this question and got some good opinions. And probably the best solution that came up with this, or that came out of this, was to make both a debug and a release version of the editor, and then ship them both. So what that would look like is we would go into edit preferences or something like that. We'd have a menu option, and you would pick from that list which version of the game module you want to load. And then if you needed to change to the debug version, it would just relaunch the editor and set everything back up. You can make the back end of the editor cache the location that you're at, and what files you have open and what everything is set to, and try and make it as seamless as possible. But ultimately what it would do is it would close and then open the debug version. And then both the debug editor and the debug game code would agree on the CRT to use. That's a pretty ambitious fix. I couldn't come up with another way to, or at least I haven't yet devised a way for you to be able to switch which CRT you're using at runtime. I think doing that would just break everything. Any place where you might use the CRT, you'd have to reload that code. But until I actually go to implement that fix, I think I'm going to go ahead and hack together a solution. So let's head back. Let's get back to the part where we were reproducing the problem. I've got a editor that will crash when I hit the play button because we are trying to load the debug version of the game code. What I think I'm going to do, I think I'm going to make the release and the development versions of the editor and the launcher, I think I'm going to make those load the debug version of the CRT always. And that's just going to make it so that I don't accidentally run into this crashing issue when I want to change back and forth between the debug, dev, and release editors. And then from there, we'll just continue to work that way, dealing with the marginal slowdown that the editor is going to come across working with the debug CRT. And then later on, when we're getting closer to making a shippable editor, we'll revisit the question of getting a debug version of the editor to ship with a release version of the editor. Yeah, that wound up being a big, long explainer that I probably could have just skipped, but that's where I'm at, headspace-wise. So let's take a look at these Cmake lists. I'm not entirely sure how I want to implement this. I could make this quote-unquote solution-wide so that it affects every project the same. And that would probably be the easiest, because it's also the easiest to undo, which we'll need to do at some point when we go to implement the more robust fix we were talking about. Let's see what Cmake offers us. For this question. Okay, so there is a flag, MSVC runtime library, and you can specify whether to use multi-threaded DLL or multi-threaded debug DLL. That is helpful. We can use generator expressions on this as well. So this is something that we can set. This is a property we can set on a target. So if I do, I probably wouldn't use this code. I would probably say set target property, or properties on my various targets. But I could just say on all of them, MSVC runtime library, multi-threaded debug DLL, which the difference between multi-threaded debug and DLL is that this is static and this is dynamic, and we want the dynamic one. This property has effect only when policy blah 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 is set to new prior to the first project or enable language command that enables a language using a compiler targeting the MSVC ABI. That's interesting. What's the policy? CMP 0091. MSVC runtime flags are selected by an abstraction. Compilers targeting MSVC ABI have flags to select the runtime library. Is it on by default? The old behavior for this policy is to place MSVC runtime library flags in the default Cmake lang flags config and ignore the new behavior is not the place. Okay. Unlike many policies, Cmake version 3.24.1, which is the latest release, does not warn when this policy is not set. It simply uses old behavior. Okay, so I actually have to set the behavior. I have to actually set this policy, I think, is what it's saying. That's great. I'm just quickly looking at an example on Stack Stack Overflow to make sure that yeah, so in this example, they did have to set that policy for the project, and then they can set the target property if they want. So I guess that's what we'll have to do. I'll copy the policy line, and then above my project, I've actually got a lot of little things above the project. Oh, that's interesting. Hang on a second. Multi-threaded. Huh. I actually do have a line already set for this, and I don't remember doing that, but apparently I did. This variable is used to initialize the runtime library property on all targets as they are created. Okay, that's probably not the best way to do this. What I'm doing is I'm setting the global variable instead of setting the value on each target. In a sense, I'm changing the default. I should probably be doing this a different way. So instead of doing that, prior to the project declaration, I'm going to be setting the policy to be the new policy, because it said that it's old by default. And then after the project line, I can set the targets to be using multi-threaded non-debug if I wanted to. I wonder if this is even working then, given that the policy's not on. Let me look this up. Yeah, so it sounds like this whole time I've had this line that doesn't actually do anything. Trying to figure out why on earth I added it. There were a couple of places where I needed to set global variables prior to the project call. Normally you don't want to be doing a whole bunch of stuff before your project call, but in my specific case I needed to add a configuration, the development configuration, and I needed that to be visible prior to the project call. Yeah, all right, so we've got the Cmake policy set, and then let's find a spot for, okay, here we go, in the editor. Actually, let's go a little higher up, in the engine. Here. We've got the two versions of the library. Here we go, build flags and settings. So we're setting both of the library targets to be C++17, telling them to use the precompiled headers, and then skipping precompiled headers on the vendor stuff. We're enabling link time optimization. I'm going to break these apart. And then after target compile features, I'll add the target set target properties on both of them. Engine dime, engine lib property T's. Is that right? Am I using that right? Target 1, target 2, properties, and then the property name, and then the value. Right. Properties, and then the property name is this guy, MSVC runtime library. And we're going to set that to new. Wait, no, sorry, that's the policy. We set this to be the configuration we want. So we want that to be multi-threaded debug DLL. But actually, I only want to do this for the dynamic version of the library. The static version of the Enterprise Engine library is used by the shipping game project only. So on that one, we will do release builds. We'll do I should say optimized builds. We'll do optimized target. So this should probably be fine. And then we'll need to make changes to the launcher. I can just copy this line. And then when we go to its build target stuff, this doesn't technically have to be platform-specific code, but I'll put it alongside the other platform-specific code, just to make this easier to follow. Yeah, so the launcher will always use multi-threaded debug DLL, and then we'll do the same thing for the editor now. We'll do that down here. So editor properties, MSVC runtime library will always use multi-threaded debug DLL on all builds. Yeah, I think that's it. The only other target is the standalone test game. Oh, you know what? The yeah, test game Cmake lists, we have to make a change as well. Because inside of this list, we have two targets, the module and the standalone game. And the module itself does need to be using the same DLL in all builds. That's test game _die. All right, let's see how this goes. Oh, there's a configuration error. What do we got? Oh, I put this in the middle of yeah, put this in the middle of set target properties. Whoopsie. Yeah. Okay, cool. We are in development configuration. So I guess I'll have to build them both. I'll start with the debug. Pressing F7. This is building all targets. I think this will be the last thing I do today, on the stream at least. Okay, we got a problem. We got several problems. Mismatch detected for runtime library. Oh, that's strange. So YAML CPP and MSDF Atlas Gen now disagree on their runtime values. So MSDF Atlas Gen apparently is using the static runtime, and YAML is using the dynamic runtime. And the second error up here is also a mismatch, but it's between the enterprise library and the MSDF Atlas Gen. That's surprising. I have a theory on why that might be happening. I'm going to test it real quick. First thing I'm doing is I'm just commenting out the changes that we made in these other files. But then in the root, we will still leave Cmake policy set whatever to new in 07. Okay, so actually just the changes to the root appears to be causing this problem. If I leave the Cmake policy alone, there's still a problem. Okay, so this actually must be why I did this. I had that line where I was setting the global default for the runtime library to be the whichever version of the DLL. That must have been to ensure that dependencies all use the same runtime. Okay. That's a bit annoying. But I guess it's still the cleanest way to handle this, if I'm being honest. So even though this is like not best practice, the best practice is to, instead of setting global flags and things, is to actually just work on targets and do all of those by themselves. In this specific situation, I'm just going to continue to use Cmake MSBC runtime library and set it globally. So I'll undo these changes in these other Cmake files. Undo, save, undo, save. All right, and then in here, in the root Cmake lists file, I will set this to just be the debug DLL. So I'm taking out that generator expression. I will leave that in as a comment so that I can just quickly switch back to it. And I'll say to do remove after debug editor is implemented. And so what this is going to do is that for every single project that I've got, every dependency, we will be using the debug version of the runtime, whether we're in release mode or not. And that's, you know, a ham-fisted approach, but it's gonna solve our problem, I think. And it'll prevent this from being annoying while we get the editor to the point where we are working on the switching from a debug to a release context. Okay, so this is all working fine. Moment of truth time is we go to dev configuration, we build it, and then we run it while playing the debug game module. And hopefully that won't be crashing anymore. Looks like this may take a minute. Yeah, I'm not really sure what I should be focusing on after this, big picture wise. Technically speaking, all we're dealing with here is a bug. It's just a really annoying one. Mouse picking presents kind of a challenge because I'm not sure that I have the infrastructure for doing that yet. I may need to focus on getting systems implemented first. So the way that systems currently work is that you just, in your entry point, you call the initialization function of the system. So that way it's launched when the editor, the launcher, or the standalone game is launched. Those systems need a way to communicate with the editor, and that's the thing I haven't figured out yet. And that communication will involve extending the editor, giving additional editor views, additional editor menus, and additional inspector elements and things like that. But it'll also have to interact with the mouse picking component. Because if you're making a renderer, there's a couple of ways we can go about this. We can either do mouse picking through ray tracing, so we cast array from, or raycasting from the camera that we're looking from in the scene view, and then we do an intersection check, and that would be pretty fast. But the one problem with that is that it's not. It depends on you having a good collider on your object, and not every object will deserve a collider. So the way that I'm leaning towards is having a specialized frame buffer, which when a renderer renders to the frame buffer, it will also render the entity ID of the thing it's rendering. And then we can just sample whatever pixel we click on, and then get the entity ID from it. Got those warnings again from the I am GUI code. I'll have to, some new warnings. What are these? Let me scroll up and see those. Compilation. Okay, so we actually do have an error here. What do we got? Both debug and ndebug are set on native file dialog. Is that true? So the development configuration must have ndebug set on it, and that's conflicting with the debug flag, which was added by the MSVC flag. So yeah, there's a problem. Okay, so here's the development configuration flags. Development configuration is my own thing. I'm just using the Cmake standard debug and release configurations, but development configuration is my own. Okay, so here's where we're setting the flags. So we have, we're setting ndebug here manually. Flags used by the CXX compiler, that's C++, during dev builds. Okay. So I'm gonna need to make an alternate version of these for now. I will duplicate them first, and then comment out the previous ones. And then in this one, we are not going to specify dndebug. I wonder why I have the debug flag for the linker though. Oh, symbols, that's what it's for. So this is not dealing with optimization, it's dealing with generating symbols for debugging. Yeah. So we want those. Okay. And then on Clang, we're going to have a similar issue because we're specifying ndebug on all of these. Yeah, so we'll need to make a alternative for these as well. Okay, and then on the alternative, we will get rid of the dndebug flags. And there's 4 lines here because on Mac OS, we also have to deal with Objective-C and Objective-C++. Yeah. Build system stuff is the worst. But yeah, everything else should be the same. Using O2 optimization, generating symbols. Yeah. Okay. Let me quickly add a comment for myself. Save that. And because we're changing something that's saved in the cache that you can edit after the fact, I do have to do a delete cache and reconfigure. And then try my rebuild. I have a feeling that there's still going to be a problem. Even if this works, I have a feeling there's still going to be a problem with the release. And I'm not really sure if there's an easy way to do that, to address that. Because the release configuration flags are all actually the defaults. They probably will specify Ndebug to indicate that it's not debug. And then that would conflict with the MSVC setting. But at the very least, the development build should work with the debug game modules and vice versa. When I go back and not review. Yeah, review the post on this topic from forever ago. Here, about a month ago. Yeah, we got those same warnings, which are well founded, but I need to deal with those separately. Okay, and it looks like we've gotten all the way up to the step where we're linking the enterprise.exe, which is good. That suggests that we don't have any problems with the compilation step. Yeah, finished with code 0. Alright, so now we're running the development version of the editor. And we've got the debug test game project, and it's working fine without crashing. That's good. And just to confirm, yeah, it says enterprise build bin debug test game module. So we are running debug code in a dev build editor without crashing. So I guess the next thing is, does the release build work? I have a feeling it won't. We're just gonna need to compile it and see. To be honest, if this doesn't work, if simply setting the MSBC flag on the released build is not enough to resolve the problem with the Debug flag on this configuration, then I may just undo this change and continue to have to switch to and from debug and release manually to prevent crashes. Because eventually the full fix is going to sidestep all of these problems that we're having to hunt down. But the full fix requires adding a whole bunch of complexity to the build system that I just am unprepared to deal with right now. Okay, those are those warnings. Okay, and we do have fatal errors here. Warning, FTG debug, redefined. That's a warning. Okay, here we go. Error. Both debug and undebug are set. Okay, and that's something I don't think I can fix here. At least not without making undue changes to data file dialog, and I just don't want to do that. Yeah, so I guess that's it for today. The changes that I was just working on for the last while, they aren't worth it. So let me undo those. All right, and that should be it. Let me confirm I didn't leave any changes to my Cmake lists. I'm good. The only Cmake list that has edits is for the test state for the game, which is not something we're going to commit. So yeah, I guess we're kind of back on track. Let me stop that build. But yeah, the as far as the debug editor goes, we're doing pretty good. Transform components ready to go. I might not stream tomorrow. I'll have to decide whether I'll have to decide which thing I want to do next, because there's a bunch of big directions that I can go in, and I don't know. I'll have to weigh out which time investment is worth, which big project is the most important. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you have a great day, night, afternoon, or early evening, or midnight, or dusk, or whatever time it is wherever you're at. I'll probably be on in a couple of days. See you later.